Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kat, and I am DWDC's Program Specialist. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Amanda and Kelsey. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather here today is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. These nations continue to experience ongoing colonization and displacement. Today, Toronto is covered under Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. Dying with Dignity Canada is also mindful of broken treaties that occurred across Turtle Island and recognize our responsibilities as treaty people to engage in a continuous process of truth and reconciliation with all peoples across this land. I am thrilled to welcome you today. Through our webinars, we aim to provide you with information and key takeaways, as well as create a space for conversation on end-of-life topics alongside the professionals that know it best. Before I welcome today's speaker, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Everyone on the call today is muted. However, there will be opportunities to submit questions. To do so, please type your questions into the question bar on the Zoom side panel, and we will read it out for you at the end. Please try to keep your questions as concise and clear as possible. While we are going to try to get to as many audience questions as possible today, unfortunately, we may not get to everybody. If you have any outstanding questions or questions that are personal in nature, please email us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca and we will follow up with you. This session will be recorded, so you don't need to take any notes. There will also be a post-webinar survey that will pop up on your screen after the webinar and will give you the opportunity to share your feedback. We're also accepting registration for an upcoming series of our Deaf Dialogues program, so please enter your information in the post-webinar survey if you are interested. And now to introduce today's speaker. Heather Spratt believes in demystifying and destigmatizing death and works to provide those at end of life with agency over their final stages. She is committed to the further professionalization and recognition of end-of-life doula supports and the customization and personalization of funerals and celebrations of life. Heather launched her company One Step Beyond End-of-Life Services in 2021 after completing the Douglas College End-of-Life Doula training in 2020 and the Life Celebrants International certification later that year. She has a Master's of Education from the University of Sydney and is delighted to bring an Atlantic Canadian perspective to the End-of-Life Doula Association of Canada's Board of Directors. Heather is also the executive director of the $1 a Day Foundation, working to fund frontline mental health and addiction services across Canada, and lives with her husband and coterie of cats in St. John's, Newfoundland. Thank you so much to Heather for joining us today. And for today's session, we're going to host both a presentation and an interview. Heather is going to start us off with a presentation that she kindly prepared for us in advance, and after which she'll answer some questions during a short interview. Heather, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kat. I'm just going to pop my screen on here and preface this by saying I'm no expert, but let's see how the tech goes. Welcome, Heather Spratt. As I said, I am going to start this off, as I just said, I am not an expert. But I am very interested in the end-of-life field. I grew up kind of troubled with the traditions in my own culture and feeling that there was a lack of connection and authenticity and human connection with what is one of the most essential human passages in our lifetimes. It always amazes me, not the folks on this call, but it always amazes me how few people want to talk about death, when it is one of the few things that happens to 100% of us, whether we like it or not. A little bit more about me. I started off as a hospice volunteer with Hospice Toronto several years ago. I'm a death doula and a funeral celebrant, and all those things work well together, I think, to kind of encompass the whole end-of-life journey. I am coming at you today from the lens of a settler who grew up in rural Ontario, and I grew up in the United Church tradition. So that very much informs my experience and where I'm coming from. I now live and practice in St. John's, Newfoundland. As I said, I'm not an expert, but the beautiful thing about planning a meaningful funeral is you don't need to be an expert. All you need to be an expert in is the person who is passing away, the person you love, or indeed, if you're planning your own funeral service, you want to be an expert in what you deeply care about, what matters to you. You want to craft a ceremony around your thoughts and your feelings and your themes that work for you. You definitely don't need to defer to the funeral industry. Sometimes people feel that they're sort of that they need to follow a certain set of guidelines. You can enlist the help of a funeral celebrant if you want help planning your ceremony, but you don't actually have to. You can do it yourself. It is wise to plan ahead, though, so you and your loved ones aren't caught off guard at a vulnerable time. Let's just situate our discussion for today. We're going to focus on the funeral or the celebration of life. Depends on how you like to call it. We're going to look at the rituals and the observances that mark one's passing. You can use this information if you're thinking about or designing your own funeral, or if you're planning ceremonies for others in your circles. I'm going to use the word funeral to encompass celebrations of life as well, which is only part of the end of life process. There's also the planning, the transitioning, the disposition, the funeral, the post-death logical considerations, and of course, dealing with grief and mourning. So the funeral is only one small part of the picture, but we're going to leave the rest of those discussions for another day. I will mention that this is one of 3 webinars in a great series. Last week, there was a session on home funerals. And next week, I believe the topic is living wakes. So there's plenty to learn in this space. And also keep in mind that you can have more than one funeral or celebration of life. You can have them in different places. You can have them at different times. They can involve different people. For me, I would like a pretty crazy and creative celebration of life. I don't think it would go down well with my octogenarian parents if they're still around. They might like something a little more traditional in the church. I'm happy to arrange that to meet that need, but also to have the celebration of life that speaks more to me and my chosen family. That would be a little bit different. We're going to talk today about societies, about planning our own rituals and ceremonies. Societies and cultures around the world forever have had rituals and traditions around death, and it's fascinating to delve into the differences amongst cultures and the differences over time. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, which I guess you are, you wouldn't be here today if you weren't, there are so many TED Talks, there are so many articles, everything right into getting a full degree in thanatology. If you're interested, there's a world of practice to discover and appreciate. I don't know of any society that doesn't mark death in some way. When thinking about your own ceremony, I just want to mention a little word about cultural appropriation. Be careful not to inappropriately adopt the practices from another culture without express permission. Try to stay on the side of cultural appreciation rather than appropriation. An example that someone shared with me was the example of a smudge. That's a traditional indigenous practice using sage to clear a space. The woman I was talking to said, she came from a Celtic background, and using sage was not part of her tradition. But when she looked into it, clearing a space with smoke was appropriate in her culture if you were using lavender or heather. So that's a way to still hold on to that idea that resonates with you without it being the inappropriate appropriation of someone else's culture. You have to make that call yourself, but when in doubt, consult with a community leader from that community. If you want to incorporate a practice of another culture, consider reaching out to someone who has more knowledge and experience than you do, and consider paying them to join your service and share their knowledge with you. There's a bit of a shift lately from moving away from mourning a death and having a funeral that's immediately, within a few days of a death, and then instead stretching that idea into honoring a life. Both are important and they do coexist. But I have seen in my experience a lot more folks really welcoming the idea of a celebration of life, something that has more uplifting music, sometimes even incorporating humor. I'm about to show you a video. Some of you may have seen it. Some folks would find this highly inappropriate. I find it highly amusing. So please, depending on your lens, please accept this in the spirit in which I share it. It does have some salty language. So my apologies. You may want to look away if that's not your style. Right, where did my thing go? There we go.
Hello? Hello? Let me out! Where the fuck am I? Hello? Hello? Let me out! The fucking dark in here! Where the fuck am I? Is that priest I can hear? The fuck? Let me out! Hello? Hello? Stop the mask! Stop, I can hear you! Hello? Hello?
There we go. I hope that you found that amusing. He certainly wanted to leave behind a little bit of humor. I'm assuming he was a pretty funny guy in his life, and he certainly took what could be a very grim moment at the graveside and leavened it a bit with some humor. So you're seeing more and more of those kinds of elements incorporated into funerals and celebrations of life. That's an extreme example, but really anything goes. I put this slide in just to acknowledge that you can really embrace technology. We learned a lot during COVID. I found the practice, I only started doing funerals during COVID, and we were live streaming. We weren't allowed to gather, so it was something that we were forced to do. But even since then, we've continued to stream services. You can share a recording. You have a memento of the service afterwards to keep. Wakes are another way that you can use technology. You may want to have a virtual drop-in where people can come and chat with the family, as opposed to standing in what in my tradition would have been a funeral home on your feet for hours, a long receiving line. You can have something that's a little more casual and fluid. You can also set up breakout rooms on the side if smaller groups want to chat, all kinds of things. At a funeral or a celebration of life, of course, it's common now to play videos. Nice to capture messages. People are getting more and more comfortable with capturing a message. There may even be a message from the person who's being celebrated. If you're planning your own funeral or celebration of life, you may like to leave a video message that can be shared at the service. For those ones with loved ones away, it's a great way to incorporate folks who wouldn't be able to journey to join the service. And of course, for those with mobility issues, it can be a lot more accessible and inclusive. You can have ceremonies that are 100% virtual. We did that during COVID, of course, but I do find a lot of people prefer the in-person opportunity to say goodbye where possible. We do like to gather as folks. People love to be involved, so please do consider involving others in your ceremony. They have the need to do something. In my tradition, everybody shows up with a casserole. People want to know, how can I help? How can I be involved? In some of the services I've helped with, I was really just directing traffic, you know, more of an MC than the person delivering the service. You can involve folks in readings. You can ask them to read things that are special to you, or perhaps choose something that's resonant to them. You can have people perform music, of course, tell stories, although I would note that we always caution against having an open mic. You've been warned that can easily get out of hand. Ceremonies can go quite long and can kind of go a bit sideways if you don't try to have a little bit of structure over the storytelling aspect. But I'll leave that with you. Some people these days choose a cardboard coffin and have people come up with markers and decorate, or, you know, add glitter or whatever you like. Sometimes people like to leave messages that can be buried with the deceased, or something that can be added to a fire, or kept by the loved ones that are left behind. Think of how weddings have changed over the years. Funerals are very much similar. You can have a photo booth. I know that's a bit casual, but it's better than just writing a name into a book. It's a really lovely memento for the folks left behind. You can do something like have a memorial walk, a type of procession, maybe ending at a special site. One of the funerals I did, we walked actually from the service to the celebration of life in a pub. And that was just kind of a beautiful way to transition from sort of more of a funeral and a bit of a sadder ceremony into the celebration. It was really nice to do that together. You may want to do a community service project together. That's a little bit more active than asking for donations. But again, it's totally up to you. One thing I always do with the folks I work with is sit down and talk about what themes come up, what is really core to this person, what was meaningful to them or meaningful to you if it's your ceremony that you're planning. You may ask people to dress in a favorite color. If somebody's really into gardening, you may give out seeds to mark the passing of a gardener. One family I worked with, the deceased was a chocoholic, and he used to love chocolate so much he stashed it all over the house. His wife and his son used to find chocolate everywhere. So we invited everyone to bring some chocolate to the service and kind of come up and leave it as an offering. And it was a beautiful moment, a beautiful connection to the deceased. And also the wife and the son went home with like 3 or 4 years worth of chocolate. They're probably sick of chocolate by now, but it was a very beautiful thing, very meaningful, very individualized towards the deceased. I've talked before about one funeral. It was in an article that we read where the woman who passed away loved playing cards. So rather than having a traditional funeral, she had a big card game. Everyone came and played rounds of cards and talked about her and just celebrated her in a way that was very comfortable and meaningful for her. You can ask folks to contribute to a playlist of your favorite songs. That's a really nice thing as well. That is something that you can keep and enjoy later. It can be played at the service, or it can be collected at the service. You can ask people to bring photos to add to a collage. Oftentimes, traditionally, you'll see folks putting together frantically photos to have at the service, but you can also build it at the service, have people add them to boards when they get to the service or the celebration. It takes the pressure off of the family. And again, it's another way to involve people in the process. You can be as creative as you want with your funeral and your celebration of life, beyond some very basic legal parameters. And there may be some religious observations for those who are observant. The sky really is the limit when it comes to planning a unique and meaningful funeral. Depending on your province or territory, your options run from using a full service funeral home to a family-led death care situation. In Ontario, for instance, anyone can take care of the funeral services, from transportation of the deceased person to all the documentation, the registration, the body care. You don't need a license, and it doesn't cost anything. Not everybody is comfortable with taking on all aspects of that. And, there is tremendous experience and support that can come from working with folks in the funeral industry. But you really don't have to. And I often feel at a vulnerable time when people pass away, they feel this obligation to go straight to the funeral home and to follow the 3-day rule, and to have this much, this many wake periods and funeral in their chapel at this expense with this casket. And really none of that is necessary. It may be helpful, and for some people that is the way to go, but for most folks on this call, I have a feeling they would like something a little bit more flexible and a little bit more individualized. Most people fall somewhere in between of the full service funeral home traditional package and doing the whole thing by yourself. But you can always customize elements of the funeral service. I really recommend working with a funeral celebrant, and take your time to have a chat with somebody that you really like, and make sure it's somebody who's willing to sit down with you, not just for 20 minutes or half an hour, but really hear all the stories in the background and really get to know you and what you would like communicated in the service. Also, don't feel pressured to do this service quickly. You can do it as long as you'd like, or you can even do it before the person passes away. I think that'll be the topic of next week's presentation. It's a beautiful thing, you hear so many wonderful things at a funeral or a celebration of life, and you think, I hope the person can hear us. Well, they can definitely hear you if you do it before they pass away, if they're comfortable with it and that feels right to you. When thinking about planning your own service and ceremony, there are so many resources out there beyond your local funeral home, for sure. I've just listed a few here that are some suggestions. Be Ceremonial is really interesting. The woman who runs that site has sort of a choose your own adventure kind of approach to putting together rituals and observances that you can craft it in a way that's meaningful to you. These other two sites are just totally free, accessible sites where you can get some ideas. Usually the desire to do something special is there, but sometimes just having a few ideas to get rolling is very helpful. And the ideas that you get here may jumpstart you to places that you hadn't thought of before, that could be really personalized and meaningful, because ultimately that's what we want when it comes to planning your own service or the service of someone that you love. So that's the end of the formal part of the presentation. Please feel free to reach out if you would like to connect with me on any of these topics. Right now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to the lovely Kat for a bit of discussion.
Heather, thank you so much for putting that lovely presentation together. I think we all learned quite a bit from that. And now we actually have some questions to get a even more better sense of how we can prepare ourselves and our loved ones for the perfect exit, or what your exit would look like in a perfect world. Okay, so to get started, do you have any suggestions for how to set the tone for different types of services, such as a celebration of life, a traditional funeral, a memorial?
Yeah, I love the way you actually phrase that, Kat, because the first thing is even to decide what word resonates with you. You know, funeral to me is a little bit more somber, a little more traditional. Celebration of life is inherently positive, so a little bit more joyous. So setting the tone that you want is key, and think of the place. Do you want it to be in nature? You know, do you want to have that expansive one with nature kind of feeling? That would set a certain kind of feeling. Do you want it to be in a darker, quieter, more sedate and meditative space? Does that resonate with you? Do you want it to be in a light-filled gallery? Do you want to be surrounded by art? Newfoundland, you might want to have a kitchen party, you know? Do you want it to be something that's casual in your own home? So some people will choose a community hall, other people will choose a place of worship. Many people I've worked with have chosen a bar. And also to set the tone, music is super powerful. You know, think of the difference between an organ playing traditional hymns versus a playlist of the person's favorite country hits. Not my cup of tea, but certainly cup of tea for other folks. So really like setting the tone, I would say, what kind of place do you want to be in? What do you want to call it? And what do you want to hear? What do you want to smell? What do you want to see? And that will set your tone.
Yeah, I think those are lovely points, to the fact that funerals are deeply personal, and they can really shine a light on our interests and our loves and what we really lived for. So it kind of portrays our legacy in a way. So I love how you said that. Thank you so much. Our next question is, could you speak about how someone could inject humor or a sense of brightness into a ceremony? I know you showed us a couple examples, especially with that little clip of the person with the audio recording saying, "Let me out of here." But do you have any humorous acts that you've seen that have worked really well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd have to say most of the folks I've worked with have chosen a celebration of life that was generally positive. Some of them have been very lighthearted. You know, our guy with the recording in the coffin is a pretty extreme example. But I would keep in mind the audience as well. Like I was saying about, you know, personally, I would want a celebration of life that's one way for my friends and another way for my family. So know your audience, and keep in mind that strong feelings are strong feelings, and you can transition from joy to grief really quickly. So be prepared for laughter and tears. And I think that both are wholly natural responses when you've lost a loved one. The ceremony should really fit the person who's passed away. So that if they lived a light and joyous life, a fitting tribute would be light and joyous. If they were deeply religious, following a traditional religious ceremony would be the right thing for them. But if I know one guy who passed away, he was very proud of his you know, his identity as a gay man, and his ceremony was Rainbow City, from banners to cupcakes, all kinds of rainbows everywhere. Other people I've worked with have been more staid and serious, and they've had more serious readings and music that was a little bit more, you know, classical in nature. To inject more positivity, though, I would try asking folks ahead of time to share some of their favorite lighthearted memories, and specifically ask for that. And put that together. Like I said, I do caution against the open mic. But putting the stories together, spending some time reflecting on who that person was and what was important to them and what would resonate with them. And I would recommend, if you can, if you're putting together a ceremony for someone, if you have the luxury of time before they pass away, talk to them before. Those are some of the best funerals I've been involved in, where the family discussed this together. Not always possible, not always comfortable. And if it's you who is planning your service, make sure that you're open and you're clear about what you want, and that you choose folks who are like-minded and will respect your wishes to help put that together. Or like I said, have a living wake. Do it before you pass away if you're, I was going to say if your death is imminent, but even if it's not, you don't have to wait, you know? Anytime that you want to celebrate a life is a good time to celebrate a life.
That's wonderfully said. I think, yeah, just as though you want to include somebody in choosing what kind of meal they're going to have today, if they're craving something, you kind of want to include them in the way that they would like to be remembered as well. So those are really great points. And I think that kind of rolls into my next question about how people are tending to move away from traditional burial services and ceremonies. Why do you think that, and what are you really seeing nowadays? Is there a big shift?
Yeah, I would say the majority of the celebrations, the majority of the events that I help with are celebrations of life as opposed to funerals. That's the choice of the folks, you know, that's what they would like to call it. I think it's a general movement here in North America to more individualized experiences in general. People like to be seen as unique individuals, and they feel freer to do that these days than they may have in the past. Fewer folks are following strict religious guidelines, and many of those who do still do like to incorporate some of their own customizations alongside the traditional aspects. People are also a lot more environmentally conscious than they were perhaps in the past, and they're moving away from embalming and the traditional burial in a vaulted in a casket in a vaulted grave. There's quite an environmental cost to that. A lot of people like the idea of being a part of the earth, being returned to the ecosystem. And so more people are choosing green burials. Aquamation is legal in some parts of Canada now, where people are choosing to be broken down by water and alkaline solution. And there's even human composting now, although to my knowledge, that's not legal in any parts of Canada yet, but I'm sure it's on its way. Something we haven't talked about yet today is the ceremony around the disposition of ashes. That can be another very meaningful part of saying goodbye to a loved one. And also, if you yourself know where you'd like to be scattered, that's something to discuss with your loved ones. But keep in mind, people who want the more environmental approach, cremation is not necessarily environmentally friendly. It takes a lot of carbon, and the ashes are not organic in the sense that in the way that a green burial would be. But anyway, all that to say, I think people are moving away from the traditional. Nobody likes to be told what to do anymore. And while we like ritual, we also like individualization. And also, traditional burials are really expensive. So a lot of people are choosing more affordable options.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. I think, yeah, I agree with you in that a lot more people now are looking at what it's doing to our planet, what it costs to do, what is good for the person that has passed, as well as the family. There's a lot of considerations to take. So yeah, it's very complex, as you know, and a lot of people know as well. And we're kind of just going to shift gears for this last question, and then we're going to get to the audience questions. So in your work as a death doula and celebrant, how do you support a deceased one's family and loved ones through their grief? Do you have any lessons that you've learned on grief that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, grief is, it's interesting, talking about funerals, people tend to think about, a death and an immediate funeral. And that's really not how death happens. And that's not how a funeral and an observance of someone's passing has to be. And then if you expand upon that with grief, sometimes people have this notion that grief is this discrete thing that it happens for like a year and that it lessens over time, and it's really not like that at all. It's something that folks carry with them, that comes and goes and manifests in very different, very sometimes patterns, but also sometimes very personal and individualized ways. I'm not an expert on grief, but one of the things I really do emphasize as a doula is the role of the doula in seeing somebody through the whole process, not just the person who's passing away, but their loved ones as well, from start to finish. It's never really finished, but it's a relationship that can start with planning. Even before there's an expected death, you can be planning for your experience ahead of time. But you can work with a doula to plan for a death. You can work with a doula, still the same doula, through the experience of the death, vigiling right up to the passage. You can work with a doula through the celebration of life, and you can work with a doula when you're facing the grief. It's a total end of life process. And it's really nice to have that continuous support as opposed to some of the fractional pieces or the compartmentalizing of it. You might have an estate planner who does one part, and you work with a doctor, a specialist for this part, and then a palliative care team for this part. But then when the person passes away, that part's over. You may work with a funeral celebrant for the for the actual celebration of life, but once that's over, that part, they're gone. You may have a grief counselor who works for a certain period of time with you, maybe sometimes before, but mostly after the loved one passes away. So you have all these kind of discrete chunks, whereas a doula can support you through the whole process. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that I wish more people had in their lives and could take advantage of. I've stayed in touch with some of the families I've worked with, long after the period of the immediate period of dying and celebrating the life and going through the initial stages of grief. It's something I really recommend, and as I said, well, you said in the introduction, that's something that I'm really committed to doing, is just helping people realize what a doula can do for you and how they can lighten your load and take care of some of the business and just allow you to focus on the profound experience of facing an end of life, whether it's yours or your loved ones, and going through that whole end of life process.
Wonderfully said. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna take some audience questions now. We have quite a few. We're gonna get through as many as we can. If we don't get to your question or it's personal in nature, again, please email us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca and we'll get back to you. But we're gonna try to get to as many as we can right now. So our first question is from the audience is, what steps or protocols do I need to take if I wish to donate my body to science? An example, like a medical institution or a university. Can you speak to that?
That is an excellent question. I believe on your donor cards in your province, you can make that specification. And that would be something that would be handled, I'm assuming, from wherever you pass away, that whoever is taking care of the disposition would arrange for that. I don't know. I've never dealt with anyone who did that. I've done organ donations, but not, yeah.
Organ donation is very different than donating your body to science. So I know for sure, in Ontario at least, you can provide consent to donate your body by filling out a consent form, which is the donation of body to School of Anatomy. And that's available at pretty much any school that has like an anatomy or medical school within it. Or you can do it in writing as per the Gift of Life Act. Basically, you just say it orally that you'd like to donate your body, and you have to have 2 witnesses. That's as much as I know. But yeah, so if you're looking to do that, I know in Toronto, University of Toronto, the Department of Surgery has a willed body program, so that might be of interest to somebody. But yeah, it is very complex, so I can't speak to it the same as other people can. And Heather, I think we know basically pretty much the same amount. So
Yeah.
okay, we'll go to the next question. Where could I start if I want to begin assembling ideas for personalizing my own funeral or a service of a loved one?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with a general like a values exercise. You know, just think about who am I, what's important to me, what have I really, what's resonated with me when I went to other people's celebrations, what doesn't resonate with me, what do I definitely not want, and sort of start with a very wide view and then work down into the things that are really important to you. I would also recommend that you talk to the people who love you the most and see what they see, you know, and what they think is really important. Not to tell you what you should do, but just to mirror back some of the things about yourself that you may not actually appreciate from the inside. Sometimes the folks who love us know us best. So I would also go there. I highly recommend the Be Ceremonial website just to see some of the ideas of what's possible and what resonates again with you, and just start putting together some ideas. It's also great to work with a funeral celebrant. You don't have to actually hire a celebrant for an actual celebration. You can help one, you know, this sounds maybe a little cavalier, but I see myself sometimes as a bit of a party planner. Like I do help people put together these events and show them what's possible. And I have lots of ideas, and I'll sit with people and talk through options and help design with them. So you could find somebody locally that you feel comfortable with and have that discussion. Or you can email me. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff.
Everybody message Heather. She can help you out with any of that. All right, thank you so much. This audience member is looking for a little bit of some ideas, I guess I would say. So I buried some of my partner's ashes in a cemetery, but still have some at home. And I'm wondering what options there are besides keeping them in an urn at home. I'm looking for something more memorable. Is there anything that you can recommend or think of?
Yeah, Google is your friend on this one. There's a ton of things you can actually do that are quite creative. There are companies that will compress ashes into gemstones and pieces of jewelry that can be very symbolic and meaningful and keep close to you. That's really nice. I've heard of other folks taking some of the cremains and making a record out of them. You can actually press a music album. You can also turn it into like pieces of sort of like almost like glass, like a bowl or something, you know. It depends what you feel is appropriate. Do you want something really like precious, like a stone? Or do you think it's funny to have your cremains shot into space? You can do that as well. It really runs the gamut. So it depends on what is meaningful to you. I would say if you can think of it, somebody can do it for you.
I love that. Some of those ideas are just ingenious, and I think they're very those are very memorable things to do. A bowl, a diamond necklace of your ashes. Those are all great ideas. Thank you for sharing. Are there any other stories you can tell about folks using technology to add to a ceremony?
I think I mentioned the ones that I have used in my presentation, but that is only my limited experience. I'm sure there are many other ways. The one I wish people would do more, that in my tradition anyway, is the drop-in wake. Because it's the kind of thing where even the people, like when you're at the funeral home, in my culture, it's very traditional to have, like, you know, say 2 or 3 hour periods where you stand in a line and you're stoic and you shake hands and maybe somebody gives you a hug. Maybe I come from a pretty hardcore farming background, but it's very tough, you know, and you're on your feet and you're in this like kind of formal environment. I've had some folks do them on Zoom, and it's so flexible. You can kind of drop in and out as you want. You can turn your camera off if you're having a moment and you need to take a minute. You know, you can go off on the side with somebody. People can, you know, say it's your high school friends, they can go off into another room. You just need somebody to moderate the discussion so that you don't want to worry about the driving. That's another thing about an end of life experience. You know, just grieve and celebrate and try to get somebody to help you take care of all the rest of it. That's what I try to do as a doula and a celebrant, is like, let me do the work. You know, that's what I'm here for. You just, you know, live the experience, and that's enough. So if it was a drop-in wake on Zoom, you know, just hire somebody to be your Zoom driver and take care of that kind of thing. But that's a really interesting question about how to employ technology more. And I'm sure there would be a lot out there if you wanted to do a little research. Sorry, my research is limited to my own personal experience.
No, that's okay. I think you spoke wonderfully about that, and I think there's so many different things that we can do with technology nowadays, that I think it's endless. So yeah, definitely. Thank you. Okay, let's see. What is the most creative funeral or celebration of life that you have helped initiate or that you know of?
I love the one I mentioned about the cards, because it's just so, it was also like rural Nova Scotia, which is not the bastion of, like, you know, where I would expect a real strain from tradition. And, you know, it was an older person as well. You don't think necessarily, we don't always credit older people with the creativity that they actually deserve. And I just thought that was so beautiful. People love to participate. So it was active. It allowed people to move around. It was very engaging. They had food. It was very casual, and it was very meaningful. So that one is definitely my favorite, and that's why I put it in the presentation. I thought that was brilliant.
It is very brilliant. I love it. Thank you. Okay, this one, we're going to switch gears a little bit. So have you ever encountered conflict or disagreements with loved ones about how to honor the deceased? If so, what was it about and how was it resolved?
Oh yeah, that is not uncommon. Sometimes it's been resolved by having multiple ceremonies, which doesn't work for everyone, but like a lot of people feel tied to one, and you're trying to have this one size fit all ritual or ceremony, when there's a lot of thoughts and feelings involved, and sometimes that's just not possible. So sometimes I counsel folks to maybe do a little something on the side that's meaningful for them. It doesn't have to be this one funeral. So maybe we negotiate a little, or we compromise a little on parts of the ceremony, but you have a separate one that's meaningful to you or to your circle, or, you know, something maybe with the disposition of ashes or something else on the side. So that is one of the ways. Basically, a lot of the times it's avoided by having the conversation with the person ahead of time. I've only had that happen like once or twice, because usually people don't want to talk about it ahead of time. And often when you have those headbutting situations, the reason it comes to the headbutting and the upset is because there's a lack of communication to begin with. So that can just be exacerbated. I mean, these are tough times for folks, right? Very, very painful, very raw emotions, lots of history. Sometimes things that have gone unsaid are coming to the surface. So I just ask people to have a lot of grace with each other and try to think, what is it that you need? What is it that the deceased person would have really, really wanted? And draw it back to that. You know, if it's something that you need, maybe you can meet that need in a different way, you know. But if you're having conflict with those around you, just focus on the person who's passed away. You know, say it's your dad. What would dad have wanted? What did dad love? Let's talk about dad rather than let's talk about me and my sister and my brother fighting about all this. Let's talk about dad and try to keep it focused. Again, a doula can be very helpful. I find a lot of the work I do is just brokering conversations and helping people get things off their chest. That can be very helpful to have somebody who's not brokenhearted and grieving to help direct some of those discussions.
Yeah, I think great points. That's kind of another question that somebody was asking was, how do you make that decision about what somebody would want at end of life if you never really got to have that conversation with them? And you kind of touched on that, and I think kind of on how we can like portray a legacy of this person, what they liked, what they like to smell, eat, wear, things like that are things that we can really help decide what the funeral or celebration of life is going to look like. So thank you for sharing that.
And a good professional is can draw that out with you, you know, can ask the right questions, can fill in the blanks, and can craft a nice service that should reflect all of those bits. And again, you shouldn't be expected to put together a beautiful service 3 days after losing somebody who's really important to you. That's a tall order. You don't have to do it within the first few days. You can wait as long as you'd like, you know, for this service, depending on your, you know, there may be religious dictates or other, you know, parameters that are important in your perspective. But in general, you know, beyond taking care of what needs to be done immediately, you can take time, and you also don't have to do it all yourself. Like I said in the presentation, people love to be involved, so give someone else the responsibility for certain elements, or give yourself the time to put it together and do it when things aren't quite as on the surface.
Right. Being emotionally charged can lead to not doing exactly what we wanted to do, making the wrong choices. Not that there is a correct way or not, but it can be really difficult to navigate when we're feeling a lot of emotion. So I completely agree with you. Involving other professionals is definitely helpful for a lot of folks. We're going to switch gears a little bit again. Do you know anything about green burials? And can you share a little bit about what that is, what that looks like, what it entails?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a big fan. Unfortunately, there aren't a ton of places where you can access a green burial yet, but they are increasing by the month. So it's not available absolutely everywhere, but it's becoming increasingly available. And a green burial is a much more natural thing where a person is buried either in something that can easily break down and fully break down into the earth, like a wicker basket or a shroud. You know, jewelry and anything inorganic is removed from the deceased's body, and only things that can be naturally decomposed into the earth are buried. Typically, there's no marker, so they're very natural spaces. You can, depending on the graveyard, the green burial space, you can locate your loved one by GPS, or there may be like a natural stone. But in general, there's nothing unnatural. And And sometimes there's a like a central spot that might have names and dates and a little message, but sometimes there isn't even. Sometimes it's just an absolutely beautiful natural space, and your body is returned to the earth. So I think that appeals to a lot of us these days. I'm also a big fan of aquamation, which is something not a lot of people know about. I know that it's legal in Ontario. I'm not sure about other jurisdictions. We don't have it yet here in Newfoundland and Labrador. But it's similar to cremation, except instead of using heat, it uses water and an alkaline solution. And the remains that are left over, the water is returned to, depending on where you are, sometimes it goes to like some places I know it goes to a flower farm or something that's a little bit more immediate to the earth. In other places, it just goes back into the municipal water system, but you're back into the system. And then the remains that are left over are a more fine white powder that are able to be then scattered or turned into a memento or kept in an urn, however you like. So that's it's similar to cremation, but it's much, much more environmentally friendly. It's also very affordable, relatively.
Those are all really great options, and I mean, so many to choose from. They all look different. You all get, it's a different outcome, but same. Actually, it's the same outcome for a lot of them. You get either the bones or you get the dust, like after the body has been taken care of with the alkaline hydrolysis or cremation. So it looks different for every outcome, but at the end, similarities. Interesting. Thank you.
There's kind of a continuum of like environmental impact, like with embalming and a hardwood varnished casket with the lining in a vault. Like that's like one end of the very environmentally unfriendly spectrum, to green burial, which is very natural. In aquamation, I would put towards that end as well.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Let's look at the time. Okay, we've got some time to answer a couple more. So how about, have you involved children in planning and completing a funeral service or celebration of life? And what did that look like for the children? How are they getting involved?
Yeah, I have involved a lot of children. And I think, and I followed up with families afterwards as well. And I think, I'm not talking about little kids, but, like students, children who, realize what's happening and understand the concept. Being involved, I think one of the, that's another movement these days, is to being more open and transparent and honest and authentic about these processes, and losing a sibling or a parent, pretending it's not happening is not going to do anyone any service. So incorporating them and having them participate, to say a few words, or maybe, depending on the comfort level of the child, we've had some that just, lay some flowers, or make some kind of an offering, some kind of light a candle, very low barrier. Not every young person is going to be comfortable with something super public, but I do feel the families where the children have been involved in the conversations, as long as they're free to go if they're uncomfortable, but I feel like they've appreciated being incorporated. Now this would be like a death doula, funeral celebrant. These are people who know they have chosen to work with me, and they maybe come from a certain background where they might be more comfortable with that kind of an approach anyway. But the reason I'm more comfortable with that approach is because I think it's very human and it's very natural. And I think being included is always a good idea.
Definitely agree. Children go through the stages of grief just like adults do. So including them is definitely something that should be done as well.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Okay. Have you ever known a person who was not in the Jewish faith use the idea of a sitting Shiva for a funeral? For those who don't know, a Shiva is a week-long mourning period in Judaism for first-degree relatives. Following the initial period of mourning immediately after death, the Shiva embraces a time when individuals discuss their loss and accept the comfort of others.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to bring up, talking about cultural appropriation. I wouldn't call it sitting Shiva, and if I was, working, or if I was myself outside of the Jewish faith, but there are some beautiful elements, like it's a beautiful tradition and really gives people the time and space. Some employers in Canada give you 3 days off if you lose someone. That's just crazy. Like, you need time to sit and reflect and share stories, and people want to connect with you, and a lot of people are moving more into these more human paced situations. Instead of standing in the funeral home for 3 hours, like I was talking about in my tradition, they're saying, I'd rather actually take the time off and sit and honor. And I don't know anyone who's done it in the same 7 days, cover the mirrors, like that's very much sitting Shiva in a traditional sense. But I don't know that anyone would object to taking time and space to welcome and reflect and receive the condolences. But if in doubt, check with somebody in the Jewish faith, check with a rabbi and see what they would recommend. Personally, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful, very human tradition.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, we're gonna do this question. So a little bit of a different question as well. What alternatives have you seen used for people who do not want to have a funeral at all, but feel that their loved ones might need it? Is there a way to avoid a set event at a place or time, but still offer a way for people to say goodbye and get closure?
That's a great question. There's a lot of folks, we didn't talk about this actually, but a lot of folks are saying, I don't want any kind of service. I don't, because oftentimes they're like, I don't like to be the center of attention. I hate a gathering. I'm certainly not going to make other people come to a gathering. Just let me go. I'm not going to be there anyway. We don't need it. However, for those of us left behind, we often need something. So it kind of can leave people feeling out of sorts, and incomplete to not have the chance to say goodbye. In those senses, in those situations, I think it is absolutely paramount to honor the wishes of the deceased person. But I think it's also absolutely necessary to honor your grief and your need to do something. So I think as long as you steer well clear of the thing it is they put the veto on, don't say, well, we're going to do it anyway. Mom's not here, so we're going to have a funeral. Please don't do that. I don't think that's very respectful, and nobody wants to treat their loved one that way. But please also don't take that as their wish as a veto on your need to grieve. So find a way that serves that need for you, that respects their wishes. They're not incompatible.
Definitely. It's definitely important to include everybody, not just the deceased, but the family and friends even, and chosen family as well. So there's a lot of aspects to consider, and it can get very complicated very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing, Kat, to keep in mind is that the death does not only affect the deceased. Like, it's important to respect that, but you can't turn off your own reactions to losing a loved one. And that needs to be addressed and respected and catered, not catered's the wrong word, cared for, you know?
Definitely, definitely. Okay, we got a little bit more time, so let's see what we can get through. We spoke about this a little bit before about how funeral homes and funerals in general can be very expensive. What are the costs involved to actually hire a service like a death doula? What does that look like? Is there a slide? Do people have a sliding scale? Is there a set rate? What does that generally
Yeah.
look like?
It depends on the doula. It depends where you are. There's, you know, when I moved to St. John's from Toronto, I had to adjust my rates for sure. I know a lot of doulas that are uncomfortable charging much at all, and I think that that's unfortunate because I think it's an important professional service and very helpful to people, and you know, someone should be compensated for their work, even if it is in service. Every doula I know, no doula is in it for the money, but every doula I know really wants to help and care. As far as the money though, it can range depending on where you are. I know some folks who would charge something like $40 an hour. When I was in Toronto, it was $85 an hour, but you don't often just do 1 hour. Usually it's in the best case scenario, you're meeting with the person facing their end of life and with their loved ones over a period of time. So I never charged $85 an hour. It was always, you know, a package of say 10 for, you know, $700 or something, 10 hours. And then for funerals, it depends. If you go through, again, it depends where you are. In the bigger cities, funeral celebrant may cost $750. In a smaller center, it might be $250. It really depends. It also depends, like everything else, what kind of service do you want? Do you want somebody who comes in and opens the book and always reads 2 Corinthians? Or do you want somebody who's going to sit down with you for as long as it takes to get to know your story and craft something really bespoke and special and bring up those ideas and be creative and be supportive? If you want that kind of service, then, you know, invest in somebody who has great references and will spend that time with you. Most people will.
Yeah, definitely. Great points. Something to also note, just for the audience, is that death doulas are not covered by insurance the same way as like social workers or a massage therapist would be. So it is expenses out of pocket, but it is very worth it for many. So just something to consider.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, death doulas are great folks to use for respite, because not only are you getting some time away if you have somebody near end of life who needs bedside attention, not only are you getting some time of respite for yourself, but you're getting a professional who can have conversations and knows how to support somebody at end of life. So, you know, if you don't, if you know, you can just do that on a sort of an ad hoc basis. And we do hope that will be recognized through insurance eventually, but we're not there yet.
It's a long road ahead, but a very worthwhile road. So thank you. So on the same topic, we're going to have one last question. This one's an interesting one. So on the topic of doulaing, can you speak to the terminology around death and dying and why some people choose to use terms like passing away versus others like die? How do you approach this as a death doula? What do you think about these terms? Which one is used more often? Which one is better, more suited for children, maybe? How do you feel about these words?
Oh, great question to end on. And they've all been great questions. It really is a matter of comfort, but personally, if you're asking me, which I think you are, I prefer to say death. You know, I call myself a death doula. I do say I provide end-of-life services because it's not just about death. It's everything from advanced care planning to funerals and everything in between. So I say end of life to be more, have a wider scope. But I think it's important to talk about life and death, you know, birth and death, and not to be too euphemistic in the sense that it again distances us more from the reality of what we're going through. I mean, death is really like, it's real, and it, you know, you feel it, and it's naked, and it's hard. And by saying, you know, someone that has passed away or they've gone to a better place, you know, sometimes I think we're kind of like crafting a little bit of a story around something that is actually important that we look at. And one of the reasons I became a death doula and a funeral celebrant is to help people become more comfortable with death and facing reality, embracing it, and even celebrating it, you know, being more natural about it. So let's try not to be too euphemistic about everything. There's no better, it's your own choice. But I think as long as we're talking about it, we're well on our way.
Agreed. And death is inevitable. And by using words like death and die, it kind of makes it more real than using words like pass away, has passed on, or things of that sort. So thank you so much for touching on that. And great questions, everybody. But unfortunately, we're out of time for today. Thank you so much to Heather for joining us. Webinars like this one and all of our other compassionate services are provided free of charge to Canadians navigating end of life, their loved ones, and their healthcare providers. To enable us to continue providing these services, please consider making a charitable donation. We will put the link in the chat in case anyone would like to donate. Again, if you have questions, feel free to email us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca and we will get back to you. Thank you again to our audience for joining us today. And thank you so much, Heather, for all of your insight and amazing stories and pictures and videos. It was very informative and we definitely learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And everybody have a pleasant afternoon. Thank you so much.